Part 74, playing cards and winning so much money, so I am very happy. When Xuan Huaifeng got to the front yard, a servant came up and asked, "Is Adjutant Xuan looking for the chief?" The chief is accompanying the guests in the small flower hall. Strange in my heart, are you playing mahjong inside? When I got to the door, I saw that the host and guests were building the Sifang Cheng. There were 4 seats, 3 of them were guests, and the host, Bai Xuelan, was facing the direction to the door. He only touched the first card in his hand, and when he raised his hand, he saw Xuan Huaifeng standing in front of the door, turning his wrist with a move, and said with a smile, "Come, come. I'm not good at learning, and I'm worried about losing money. Come here, help me take a good look. Don't let them fool you." The 3 people in the same seat quickly said, "Whatever you say. Whatever you say. Even if we eat the guts of a leopard, we won't dare to fool you. It's too late to honor you." What? They turned their heads again and nodded to Xuan Huaifeng to say hello. Xuan Huaifeng smiled again and saw that Bai Xuelan was still recruiting him, and said, "I'm not good at mahjong, so you should play." "I'll go to the study." Bai Xuelan said. "What are you going to do in the study? There is no important official business waiting for you to do. Please cheer me on, and you will leave me behind?" Turning to the staring bosses, he smiled gently. "Look, my adjutant is very courageous, don't give me a face." The crowd hurriedly said, "What to say, what to say?" Adjutant Xuan has always been diligent in official duties. And a very serious person. I heard that he has never liked to play mahjong and listen to operas. Young people like to do things, not to play, so it's a rare advantage. It definitely doesn't mean that he doesn't give you a face. Bai Xuelan smiled. "It's hard to say. There are a lot of people who don't give me a face recently. And they all try to make me uncomfortable. So, I'm a little suspicious of everyone." There was an immediate silence all around. Several big bosses, you look at me, I look at you. And look at each other. After a while, the man in the silk jacket, the braid, and the emerald finger on his hand, smiled and said, "We all know Adjutant Xuan's loyalty. It is someone like the chief who can make Adjutant Xuan like this. The talented person is loyal to his life. I think he will never deliberately make the chief uncomfortable. But he just wants to do more business for the chief." Bai Xuelan's mouth slightly raised, as if very happy, but he said, "I give him everything. Wearing a high hat and praising him for not treating me as his boss in the future. I will ask him to settle the account. No matter. Tonight I want to change his rules." He actually stood up and walked to the door to pull Xuan Huaifeng in, pressed his shoulder, let him sit on his seat, and said with a smile, "You just play. I'll watch it for you." Xuan Huaifeng has always hated playing cards, but in front of outsiders, he must give some face to his chief, Bai Xuelan. Not to mention that Bai Xuelan is surprisingly refreshed and handsome today. Xuan Huaifeng turned his head to look over, just right seeing that smile, even though it was a little cynical. It was really charming. "Will gladly obeys." Xuan Huaifeng said, "You forced me to fight. If you lose money, don't rely on me." Bai Xuelan said, "I told you that I would watch for you. So how could you lose?" After getting a chair over, he sat comfortably next to Xuan Huaifeng, apparently making up his mind to become a military advisor. The cards were already built when Xuan Huaifeng entered the door, and none of them were dealt. It happened that Xuan Huaifeng was sitting in the village. He should be the first to play cards. He looked at the smooth mahjong row standing in front of him. He couldn't help laughing. "Cards, you refused to play, so you pulled me to the top of the cylinder?" As he said, he knocked out the 9 cylinders he had just touched. Bai Xuelan was very calm and said, "This card is not stinky. If you draw another 3 of a kind and a 7 of a kind, it will be a good deck." Xuan Huaifeng said, Gold 3 silver 7, how can it be so easy? 3 of a kind. Before he could finish speaking, the man next door wearing an emerald wrench threw a card down. Xuan Huaifeng was stunned. Bai Xuelan snorted in his ear and asked, "Aren't you taking cards?" Xuan Huaifeng glared at him while others were not paying attention, before putting down the 2 cards and taking a 3 of a kind. After a while, it was the master again, who played a 7 trick. Xuan Huaifeng knew that he wanted it on purpose, so he couldn't help feeling a little embarrassed. Like a mirror in my heart. These people are all wealthy merchants in the capital, and they always rely on Bai Xuelan, the head of the customs, for some things. Most of them came here tonight to flatter them. Playing cards. If you can play cards, it is very boring to come up with this well-known cheating. Xuan Huaifeng glanced at Kitiao on the table, reached out and touched a new card, but it was a useless 9 pipe, so he had to throw it out again. Bai Xuelan asked, "Why didn't you eat the 7 cards just now? With this one, the card will be fine." Xuan Huaifeng was not easy to expose. He frowned slightly and said indifferently, "It's better to touch yourself if you eat other people's food." Bai Xuelan's eyes were like stars, snapped his jadeite fingers and said, "Boss Joe, you see, the head of the customs is really not easy to handle now. He has to deal with both inside and outside. He finally has a bite to eat. And then he encounters some disobedient people who only talk about the Lord, back legs." He spoke in front of people, always elegant and gentle, smiling before he spoke. Now he suddenly said the unpolished word, the Lord, but he didn't appear rude and arrogant. It's just a dangerous coolness that makes people nervous. Xuan Huaifeng became vigilant subconsciously, and looked at the eyes that Bai Xuelan was looking at. He doesn't deal often with merchants, and this one has never been seen before. Just after hearing Bai Xuelan's words, he realized that his surname was Joe. Boss Joe seemed to be someone who had been in the shopping mall for many years. He smiled very kindly and forbearing, seeing Bai Xuelan talking to him. He actually stood up to answer and said, "Boss Pai, Joe is here to make amends tonight. The person who is useless and bumped into you deserves to suffer a little." "What kind of person are you, Chief? When you raise your hand, you are 7 or 8 feet taller than his child's head. I just ask you to be large." The 2 neighbors Wei also quickly stood up, and they all bowed their hands and begged, "Please raise your hand high." Bai Xuelan was non-committal, raised his hand, flicked his wrist twice in the air, and greeted, "Sit, sit." "Rules. Chief. Sit down." Bai Xuelan said with a faint smile, "I have such a stinky temper. I have fun, I can say anything. If I am not happy, don't say anything. Everyone, don't think I can't play well. Are you happy?" Xuan Huaifeng understood. This week's boss, no need to ask, is the father of young Master Zhou who learned to drive, killed someone and left. At that time, young Master Zhou regarded human life as nothing, and the people in the police department didn't care. He was arrested by Bai Xuelan and Luo Ji. Xuan Huaifeng's frowning brows were immediately undone, watching the 3 bosses sit down with uneasiness on their faces, and smiled lightly. "The most important thing in playing cards is to be happy. The 3 of you don't let me disappoint our chief executive officer tonight. Boss Wang, it's your turn to draw the cards." The next few cards were actually getting smoother and smoother, and the good cards were made up in a short while, just waiting for Hu Si Kitiao. Boss Wang was under him, and suddenly he played a 4 bar. Just as Xuan Huaifeng was about to say, "Huh," the back of his hand suddenly became hot. It turned out that Bai Xuelan put his big palm on his hand, and smiled at him. "What's the hurry? Didn't you say you want to touch yourself?" Xuan Huaifeng thought, it's already time. And he's still waiting to touch himself, and let others fool me, what to do? But he didn't care about winning or losing. Bai Xuelan asked him to wait for him to touch himself. So he was happy to wait for him to touch himself, but he only touched 6 or 7 cards in a row, but he didn't. The other 3 also looked like a bad hand, and no one ever got it. Soon. There are not many cards left, and each person draws 3 or 4 cards. I am afraid it will be a bad game. Xuan Huaifeng touched another one, but it was a 9 tube again. He couldn't help laughing. He shook his head and punched it out. He whispered, "You are too greedy. What about your sweet baby?" The words were spoken very low, and his lips almost touched Xuan Huaifeng's earlobe. Xuan Huaifeng's chest was itchy, and he felt uneasy. He didn't expect that Bai Xuelan would dare to be so intimate and explicit in front of outsiders. He said with a smile, "But it's this one." When he put it on the table, it was exactly one of 4. Bai Xuelan asked proudly, "How is it? Am I right? The timid ones starved to death and the bold ones to death." The 3 bosses laughed bitterly and took the initiative to hand over the chips in the small drawer. In the next few games, Xuan Huaifeng won again and again. He used to be in Xuan Mansion, and occasionally, according to his father's instructions, he would come out for a little entertainment and play small cards. But he had never been as happy as he is today. Bai Xuelan is also rarely interested, pointing to the card and instigating in his ear, "This one, play this one, it's better to do it all, and the number of numbers is big." Xuan Huaifeng said, "No. It's risky like this. Do it all. I'm going to throw out these few cards, so what's the point of being fooled?" Bai Xuelan said, "Let's talk about it first. If you lose, you'll have to pay for it with your salary, so I won't take advantage of it." Xuan Huaifeng said, "Hey, this is still what the chief said." Even so, he still threw his cards as Bai Xuelan said, and went to make up for it. Unexpectedly, after eating 2 cards, they made it up again, and Boss Joe's was fooled. Winning is always happy, and Xuan Huaifeng smiles more. His appearance and demeanor were inherently good, with black hair and a jade face, and when he smiled, he showed a little white and fine teeth, and it was difficult to take one's eyes away. Although the 3 bosses are full of bitterness, it is bittersweet to see such a lively appearance. While shuffling the cards, Boss Wang smiled and said, "Adjutant Xuan said you couldn't play cards. But you were trying to coax us old men." Xuan Huaifeng said, "I really don't know how to play, I'm just lucky." Disc, or Xuan Huaifeng won. After reshuffling the cards, Xuan Huaifeng saw that he had won 2 red hits and 2 white boards. Bai Xuelan was also happy, and muttered to him, "Keep these 2 pairs. And see if I can make a fortune later and save up a small 3 yuan. Xuan Huaifeng listened to his idea, touched 2 pairs, touched after 4 or 5 hands. "I actually touched a piece of money and came back." However, Boss Zhang touched a piece of making a fortune, felt it was useless, and threw it out. Xuan Huaifeng couldn't help but raise his lips and said, "Boss Zhang, I can't bear with you anymore." He pushed the card. The small 3 yuan was added to the whole, the flower cards were added. And the zhuang was added. It was 48 times. Boss Zhang pulled out the small drawer in front of him, turned it over and emptied it, and the chips were still not enough. He spread his hands and smiled bitterly. "How can this be?" "Okay," Bai Xuelan said indifferently, "it's easy to handle. You write a check and ask Huaifeng to cash it for you. Or you'll get it." He couldn't even fit the small drawer with the chips now, so he took a stack and asked Bai Xuelan to hold it for him. As expected, Boss Zhang took the checkbook out of his pocket, took the pen and wrote it one by one, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and tore it off and handed it to Xuan Huaifeng. Xuan Huaifeng counted the bottom 10 chips, deducted the 48 times that he won just now, and handed the rest to Boss Zhang. took the check, and swept the amount, and was immediately stunned. Look at Bai Xuelan with questioning eyes. 100,000? Bai Xuelan was still understatement, and asked, Boss Joe, how many chips do you have? The flesh on Boss Joe's face shook, but the reaction was quick. He opened the small drawer and said softly, I've lost almost the same here, and I would like to ask Adjutant Xuan to pay me the bottom of the 10, otherwise I won't have any chips later. Which will be inconvenient. He took out the checkbook, wrote a huge check for 100,000 tremblingly, and handed it to Xuan Huaifeng with both hands. In front of Xuan Huaifeng. His fingertips were shaking, obviously very heartache. This is blatant extortion and bribery. Xuan Huaifeng hesitated for a moment. Bai Xuelan was worried that he was too upright and didn't know how to be flexible, so when he wanted to talk to his ear, he saw Xuan Huaifeng raise his hand. Accept the check without changing his face, throw it into the small drawer, and start shuffling the cards, said with a smile, This is the first time I played poker so much. To be honest with you, I was a little sleepy at first, but after playing for a while, I feel refreshed. How about playing all night tonight? When he saw that he was interested, Boss Joe's heart was twisted like a knife. His laughter was worse than crying, and he had to nod his head frequently. In the next few games, it was still the same, and Huaifeng alone won. Xuan Huaifeng already knew that several opponents did not dare to mess with his cards, and while drawing the cards, he asked Bai Xuelan, Chief, you said last time that the Drug Rehabilitation Institute's approval has been issued. Who will handle the specific matters? Bai Xuelan lazily read the cards beside him, almost resting his chin on his shoulder, and said casually, You can do it. Xuan Huaifeng said, You asked me to do it, I naturally dared not to do it. But where will the funds come from? I want you to give me a note for spending the money. Bai Xuelan asked, How much is it? He said slowly, repairing the house, furnishing it, hiring doctors and nurses, and opening it, all these things will cost 400,000 or 500,000 to be done neatly. When it is really done, there will be expenses every month. Western medicine is expensive, I was thinking, maybe 80,000 to 90,000 yuan a month. In this way, even if you add half a year's funding, it's almost 1 million yuan. The bosses across from him suddenly groaned in their hearts. I am extremely regretful that I have offended Bai Xuelan, the devil of the world. You shouldn't get tangled up and ask your sons and nephews to go to the pier to make trouble. I thought that public anger is hard to commit, and the law does not blame the public. These are the most powerful words in the past, and the chief of customs should understand. For his splendid future as an official, he must understand. Unexpectedly, the surnamed Pai, who looked like a talented person, was suave, and had drunk a belly full of foreign ink, so he only knew fists and gun barrels. After showing his face, without blinking his eyes, he ordered the closure of the wharf to arrest people. Regardless of the protests, he directly threw the leaders into the customs prison, frustrating a few behind-the-scenes messengers. Especially Boss Joe, the young master of his family, has not suffered a bit since he was born. He heard that he had to eat less food and wear less clothes in the customs prison. He was bitten by mosquitoes and had pustules all over his body and was beaten. When Mrs. Joe heard the tragedy of her grandson, she cried several times and fainted. Ugh! This chief of customs is really an unreasonable lunatic. It is really impossible to fight against such a lunatic. We must take the retreat as the advance, and serve softly for the time being. The sun is pinched in Bai Xuelan's hand. Don't persuade him to be soft at this moment. Even if he cuts the flesh on his body, he can only let it go. 1 million? Bai Xuelan's expression changed slightly. You're making it difficult for me. The department has a lot of money every year, and it can't be used without authorization. Where can I get the money for you? This detoxification is not the customs office. If you have to ask the Prime Minister to approve the bill and ask for money, then you will definitely be closed. Halfway through, Xuan Huaifeng's voice suddenly rose a little. Self-touch. Slap. A card is turned over and placed on the table, and the mahjong in the remaining row is brought down. Touched a pair of who? The three bosses were sweating profusely from the loss, so they had to take out their chips again. Boss Zhang and Boss Zhou have just exchanged the bottom 10, and there are still chips to give, but Boss Wang's drawer is now empty. Boss Wang said with a strong smile. Adjutant Xuan has a good hand. How can people stand it? My family is weak. Unlike Zhangzhou, the bank can draw large checks at any time. So, let's cash the 5 first. If I lose these 5 again, I'm out of luck. Bai Xuelan picked his teeth with a toothpick, smiled coldly, and said, Boss Wang is joking. I don't know about others. I have always understood the relationship between you and President Wu Yang of the Chamber of Commerce. For Bank of Asia, there is no need for a check, just if you take the white note you wrote. You can get 100,000 yuan immediately, don't you think? Boss Wang's face turned pale. Knowing that he went to discuss with the president of the Chamber of Commerce to collect evidence of Bai Xuelan's crime, Bai Xuelan got wind of it out of nowhere. This Bai Xuelan played cards unreasonably, and especially advocated violence. He is now very clear. Recalling that the Demon King once shot a big cigarette dealer in the Jinghua building. Boss Wang shivered and changed his tone. Then, it's better to pay the 10 bottoms. Unable to say, he took out the check and scribbled it. A $100,000 bill. Xuan Huaifeng took it and stuffed it in the small drawer. Now counted, 3 checks, has been 300,000. With such a large amount, it is a little uneasy to be called a winner. Xuan Huaifeng glanced at Bai Xuelan secretly, and when he saw him winking frivolously at him, he quickly turned his head back. Putting his hands on the table, he shuffled the cards. Continue to fight, occasionally win or lose, but Xuan Huaifeng still wins more. Everyone was afraid of Bai Xuelan, and they didn't dare to eat Xuan Huaifeng's cards, let alone bully him. The cards shook violently. It wasn't until 1 o'clock when Boss Wang played the cards again, and Xuan Huaifeng was stunned. After counting 8 times, Boss Wang emptied the small drawer. Just enough to give, and lost all the 10 bottoms he had previously exchanged. Bai Xuelan asked, Boss Wang, will you exchange the bottom 10 again? They have seen many corrupt officials, but they have never seen such ruthlessness. Who in the officialdom does not keep 3 points for doing things, so we can see each other in the future? This surnamed Pai is too extreme. Boss Wang jumped up as if his tail had been stepped on, and said with a miserable smile, Boss Pai, you are holding your hands high. I know I'm wrong, I can't bear this little belonging thing. He bowed his hands and gave a long bow. Seeing him like this, the other 2 didn't dare to neglect and stood up. Boss Zhang said, Chief Pai, please give me a chance. We are also the breadwinners. We will just listen to what you say in the future. We will never dare to make you feel unhappy. Boss Zhou said, that's right, that's it. This time, I really did something stupid, and Zhou was extremely ashamed. From today, I must cooperate with the customs work. Oh, I must be enthusiastic about social charity. The opening of the drug rehabilitation center will inevitably require curtains and sheets. Zhou has nothing else but the cloth. It will never be a problem. Everyone should contribute to this social cause. In the future, I will donate all the materials needed by the drug rehabilitation center for a long time. Xuan Huaifeng smiled. Boss Zhang hurriedly said, I have also come into contact with some medicines in the United Kingdom and the United States. If Adjutant Xuan can use it, I can help contact the pharmaceutical factory and public welfare undertakings. The cost to the Drug Rehab Institute is as much as it takes. Of course, that's just the contribution. And I have to pay for it myself. Every month, I donate 1,000 yuan. Boss Wang was very sensible and followed behind, and also verbally promised a donation, and said, "This is a good thing. The business community should participate in this grand event. It would be very good to hold a charity performance in the name of the General Administration of Customs." Wang is not talented, so I recommended myself to be a member of the preparatory committee. Bai Xuelan listened casually. After they finished speaking, he nodded and said, "Thank you for your kindness. This is really a blessing to the society." He patted Xuan Huaifeng on the shoulder and said with a smile, "You have a great face, a big problem. Just now say it, and someone will help you solve it." "Thank you to the bosses." Xuan Huaifeng thanked him. The star eyes are bright, and the corners of the mouth are smiling, which is very charming. Bai Xuelan asked him, "Are you still playing cards?" It shocked several bosses into a cold sweat. Knowing that Bai Xuelan had played enough, Xuan Huaifeng shook his head and said, "It's too late, it's almost 2 o'clock. This is the end of the game, what do you think?" Of course, everyone nodded desperately. Xuan Huaifeng opened the small drawer, took 3 checks, and threw the rest of the chips on the table, saying, "These small numbers don't need to be counted. The chips over 20 are considered a huge amount of money." This time, Mr. Wang and Mr. Zhangzhou originally thought that he would have to bleed this time before he left, but he was gently let go by Xuan Huaifeng, and he couldn't help but be overjoyed. Bai Xuelan stood up, asked the servant to call Adjutant's son in, and instructed, among the people arrested at the dock, a few of them did not make trouble, but were just watching the fun and were caught by mistake. "You will make a phone call tonight, tell them to let the people go." He repeated the names of the names to be released. Adjutant's son took notes on paper and hurried to do it. The people's hanging hearts let go, and they thanked each other repeatedly. Bai Xuelan waved his hand and swept his eyes around their faces with a bit of sharpness, and said, "Everything is done. I just turned around and asked the 3 of you a word. I hope the 3 of you will tell the truth." The 3 looked at each other. "Hope, feel apprehensive," Boss Wang said. "Whatever you want to ask, just ask. We have nothing to tell the truth." Bai Xuelan said, "Okay, I'll really ask." After a while, he asked in a deep voice, Da Xin about the dock. "What kind of role does a foreign firm play?" Xuan Huaifeng suddenly felt a thunder in his ear, his body trembled suddenly, and he turned his head to look at Bai Xuelan in disbelief. At this time, Boss Wang naturally did not have the righteousness to stand up for Lin Qijun. He sighed and said, "Mr. Pai, to tell you the truth, this time, it is the beginning of Da Xin Yangxing's business. Loyalty, he instigated us to make trouble, but his family's ship avoided it and didn't enter the port that day. When I think about it, I feel wronged." The 2 next doors quickly took the opportunity to distance themselves. "Yes, it's all Da Xin Yangxing's tricks. And we were fooled." The matter on the other side of the Chamber of Commerce was also proposed by Lin Xiaodong's family. "Last time, he invited us to go." Bai Xuelan saw Xuan Huaifeng's face pale. He pressed his hand in the air, cut off everyone's words, and said, "I understand, thank you all. It's late at night. Do you still want to pick up someone?" The precious son and nephew who left the customs prison dragged their chubby bodies and hurriedly said goodbye. Bai Xuelan saw the guests off to the gate, and when he walked back to the small flower hall, Xuan Huaifeng was no longer there, and only a servant was yawning while packing up his mahjong chips. Back in the room, I saw the quilt on the bed bulging high. Bai Xuelan walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, pulled down a corner of the quilt to reveal Xuan Huaifeng's face, kissed his lips, and asked, "It's not a good habit to sleep with your head covered. The delicate clavicle is rubbed." Xuan Huaifeng's brows trembled, and he said, "At midnight, don't make trouble. I'm very sleepy." He turned over and faced inside. Bai Xuelan forcefully turned him back, rubbing his face against his neck, and asked, "Where is my money?" Xuan Huaifeng asked, "What is your money?" Bai Xuelan said, "The money for playing cards tonight, isn't it mine? Here are 3 checks. Xuan Huaifeng said, "What can I do for you?" "This is from the Drug Rehabilitation Center." Bai Xuelan wondered, "It's obviously mine. How did it become a drug rehabilitation center?" "Small fighting gained in gambling. At least help me buy some clothes and invite me to drink a few drinks." Xuan Huaifeng couldn't help but smile, then glanced at him earnestly, and said, "I'm really sleepy. Don't make me sleep." Turning back, he still closed his eyes to the inside. Bai Xuelan didn't pull him this time. He changed into cotton pajamas, turned off the light, and went to bed. Hugging Xuan Huaifeng's waist and pressing against his back. The moonlight outside the window is like water, and the insects are singing quietly. After an unknown amount of time, Bai Xuelan said, "I want to deal with Da Xin Yangxing. This is official business, no matter if it's a personal relationship." The body he was hugging suddenly shook and became stiff. Obviously, Xuan Huaifeng didn't sleep at all. Bai Xuelan didn't make a sound, and slowly rubbed his palms on his slender waist, like petting a cat whose fur was about to explode. With a kind of reassuring certainty in his tenderness. It seemed like a magical move. One moment, gently, the fingertips brushed the ups and downs of the waist. The ancient massage technique in general. A little bit of heat, a little bit, depending on the fabric, it penetrated lightly like nothing, penetrated into the flesh, penetrated deep into the bones, and touched the heart and lungs. Xuan Huaifeng let out a long breath silently. The tense body gradually relaxed. Understand this.